When God leads, he does not always explain himself, and that is where faith is truly tested. Many people want direction with details, confirmation with comfort, and instruction with assurance. But God often speaks in a way that requires trust before clarity. He calls us to move without showing us the entire plan, because faith is not built on full understanding. It is built on confidence in his character. If God explained everything in advance, we would rely on information instead of relationship. He wants us to know his voice more than we know the outcome. There are moments in life when God's direction feels incomplete. He gives you just enough light to take the next step, but not enough to see the whole road. This is intentional. God is teaching you to depend on him daily, not occasionally. When you demand explanations before obedience, you are asking God to submit his wisdom to your comfort. But God's ways are higher, and his plans are often beyond what our limited perspective can grasp. Trust begins where explanations end. Many times, the instruction from God will challenge logic. He may ask you to leave something stable, release something valuable, or step into something unfamiliar. Your mind will question it, your emotions will resist it, and your fear will magnify every possible risk. Yet God's guidance is not governed by human reasoning. What feels risky to you may already be secured by him. What feels uncertain to you may already be settled in heaven. God does not need your understanding to accomplish his purpose. He needs your obedience. Faith is not passive. It is an active decision to move even when you feel unsure. When God leads without explanation, he is inviting you into a deeper level of trust. He is saying, walk with me, not ahead of me. Lean on me, not on your own understanding. In those moments, following God becomes less about knowing where you are going and more about knowing who is leading you. His presence becomes your assurance when clarity is absent. There is also protection in unanswered questions. If you knew everything in advance, fear might stop you from moving. If you saw every challenge ahead, you might never take the first step. God withholds details not to confuse you, but to preserve you. He reveals the journey in stages so your faith can grow with each step. Every act of obedience strengthens your spiritual confidence and deepens your dependence on him. When you learn to follow God without explanation, you develop spiritual maturity. You stop panicking over uncertainty and start resting in his sovereignty. You learn that God's silence does not mean absence, and his mystery does not mean neglect. Even when you do not understand his direction, you can trust his heart. He has never led anyone into destruction, only into purpose. And when you finally look back, you will realize that what felt unclear at the beginning was actually the safest path you could have taken. Following God often means walking away from comfort, familiarity, and what feels emotionally secure. Obedience is rarely convenient because God is more concerned with our growth than our ease. Many people desire God's direction as long as it confirms what they already want. But true obedience begins when God's instruction challenges personal preference. When God leads you, he is not inviting you to stay where you are comfortable. He is calling you to become who you are meant to be. Comfort creates routine, and routine can quietly replace faith. When life feels predictable, we begin to rely on what we can control rather than on God's voice. This is why divine direction frequently disrupts familiar patterns. God moves you not because where you are is bad, but because where He is taking you requires a stronger faith, a deeper character, and a greater dependence on Him. Obedience stretches you beyond what feels safe and pulls you into transformation. There are moments when obeying God feels like loss before it feels like gain. He may ask you to release relationships, habits, opportunities, or mindsets once brought security. From a human perspective, it can feel like sacrifice without guarantee. But obedience is never about immediate reward. It is about alignment. When your life aligns with God's will, peace replaces anxiety, even in uncomfortable seasons. You may not feel settled in your surroundings, but your spirit becomes anchored. God does not measure success the way the world does. What looks like progress to others may actually be disobedience in His eyes. Likewise, what appears to be a setback may be the very step of obedience that positions you for future blessing. Obedience may cost you applause, approval, or understanding from people who cannot hear what God is saying to you. But the voice that matters most is the one that called you. When you obey God, you answer to Him alone. Discomfort is often a sign that obedience is working. When God is shaping you, He presses against your fears, challenges your pride, and confronts your need for control. Obedience exposes areas where comfort has become an idol. God removes false security so that you can learn to trust Him fully. In those moments, faith becomes more than a belief. It becomes a lifestyle. You stop asking God to bless your plans and start asking Him to direct your steps. Obedience also builds spiritual authority. Every time you choose God's will over personal comfort, you strengthen your spiritual discipline. You become more sensitive to His voice and more confident in His leading. What once felt frightening becomes familiar, and what once felt impossible becomes manageable. Obedience trains your heart to respond quickly when God speaks without negotiation or delay. God never leads you out of comfort without purpose. The discomfort you experience is not punishment, it is preparation. He is enlarging your capacity to carry greater responsibility, deeper blessing, and stronger faith. When you choose obedience over comfort, you may feel stretched, but you are never abandoned. God walks with you through every uncomfortable step, shaping you into someone who can handle the future He has already planned. Faith is not waiting until everything makes sense. Faith is moving while questions still exist. God often requires action before clarity because clarity is not the foundation of faith. Trust is. Many people hesitate because they want certainty, confirmation, and visible proof before they take a step. But God's pattern is different. He reveals direction in motion, not in stillness. When you step out in faith, understanding begins to unfold along the way. Waiting for clarity can become a spiritual trap. It feels responsible, wise, and cautious, but it often masks fear. Fear wants guarantees. Fear wants control. Faith, however, is willing to move with incomplete information because it trusts the one who gives the instruction. God does not ask you to figure out the entire journey. He asks you to trust Him with the next step. When you obey the step, He reveals the step you need. God's guidance is progressive. He gives enough light for the present moment, not for the entire future. This is because faith grows in stages. If God showed you everything at once, you might feel overwhelmed or attempt to rush ahead of His timing. By revealing clarity gradually, God teaches patience and dependence. Each step taken in faith becomes a lesson in trust, and each lesson strengthens your spiritual confidence. There is a divine order in how God works: faith first, clarity later. When you reverse that order, you limit your spiritual growth. Miracles, breakthroughs, and answered prayers often sit on the other side of obedience. The Red Sea did not part until the people moved forward. Provision did not fall until obedience was demonstrated. God responds to faith that acts, not faith that waits endlessly for perfect conditions. Taking a step of faith does not mean the absence of fear. It means fear no longer controls the decision. You may feel uncertainty, resistance, or hesitation, but faith chooses obedience anyway. God honors movement. He blesses forward motion. When you step out trusting Him, even with trembling hands, heaven responds to that decision. Faith activates God's involvement in ways hesitation never will. Clarity that comes after faith is deeper and more meaningful than clarity that comes before. When understanding follows obedience, it builds testimony. You can look back and see how God guided you, protected you, and provided for you step by step. That experience creates unshakable confidence for future seasons. You stop needing constant reassurance because you have witnessed God's faithfulness firsthand. Faith also refines your spiritual hearing. When you learn to move without full clarity, you become more attentive to God's voice. You listen more closely, pray more earnestly, and depend more fully. This intimacy strengthens your relationship with God. You are no longer following Him for explanations, but for connection. When faith goes first, clarity becomes a reward, not a requirement. God does not withhold understanding as punishment. He releases it as confirmation along the journey. Each step of obedience unlocks new insight, new strength, and new direction. What once seemed confusing begins to make sense, not because circumstances changed, but because your trust deepened. God's perspective is not limited by time, emotion, or circumstance. While we see only what is in front of us, God sees what lies ahead, what surrounds us, and what is hidden beneath the surface. His guidance is shaped by knowledge we do not possess. When He directs your steps, He is responding not just to your present situation, but to your future needs, unseen dangers, and unfulfilled purpose. What feels confusing to you is often God protecting you from something you cannot yet perceive. There are moments when God leads you away from opportunities that look promising. From a human viewpoint, it may seem like a missed chance or an unnecessary detour, but God sees the full impact of every decision. He knows the relationships that would drain you, the environments that would weaken your faith, and the paths that would distract you from your calling. His redirection is not denial, it is divine protection. God closes doors not to frustrate you, but to preserve you. God also sees provision before you need it. He arranges resources, support, and favor ahead of time, even when you feel unprepared. When He leads you forward, He has already gone before you. The provision may not appear immediately, but it is positioned at the right moment. What you perceive as lack is often a delay in visibility, not a delay in supply. God does not guide you into emptiness. He guides you into prepared ground. Many times, the reason God does not explain his direction is because you would focus more on the obstacle than on his ability to overcome it. If you knew every challenge ahead, fear might convince you to stay where you are. God shields you from overwhelming knowledge so that you can move forward with trust instead of anxiety. His silence is sometimes an act of mercy. He reveals what you need when you need it. God's vision also includes purpose beyond your personal comfort. He sees how your obedience will impact others, open doors for those connected to you, and create testimonies that strengthen faith. Your journey is never just about you. When God leads you, he is aligning events, people, and timing to accomplish something greater than what you can imagine. What feels like a small step of obedience may be the key to someone else's breakthrough. Trusting God's sight over your own requires humility. It means accepting that limited vision cannot compete with divine wisdom. When you follow God, even without understanding, you are placing confidence in his ability to guide you safely. You are acknowledging that he sees the end from the beginning and knows how to lead you through every season. As you walk in obedience, you will eventually recognize how many dangers were avoided, how many wrong turns were prevented, and how many blessings were perfectly timed. Looking back, you will realize that God was not guessing. He was guiding. His direction was precise, intentional, and rooted in love. Even when you could not see the reason, God could see the result. And his leadership was always moving you toward life, peace, and purpose. Delay often feels harmless, but in the spiritual realm, it can quietly weaken momentum and dull obedience. When God gives direction, timing matters just as much as the instruction itself. Obedience is most powerful when it is immediate. The longer a person waits, the louder fear becomes and the more excuses begin to surface. What starts as caution can quickly turn into compromise. God's voice is clear in the moment, but hesitation allows doubt to interrupt what was once certain. Many people miss divine opportunities, not because they refuse God, but because they postponed obedience. They tell themselves they will move when conditions improve, when confidence increases, or when circumstances feel safer. But God's timing is intentional. He speaks when the moment is right, not when it is comfortable. Delay can cause you to step outside of alignment with his plan, and once alignment is lost, progress becomes harder. Fear is the primary reason delay takes hold. Fear of failure, fear of criticism, fear of loss, and fear of the unknown all push people to wait instead of move. But fear thrives on hesitation. The more time you give it, the stronger it becomes. Faith, on the other hand, grows through action. When you obey quickly, fear does not have time to take root. Immediate obedience protects your courage and preserves your spiritual sensitivity. God's instructions are often connected to specific seasons. There are windows of opportunity that open and close according to his timing. When obedience is delayed, those windows can close. This does not mean God abandons you, but it does mean the path may become longer, harder, or more painful. Delayed obedience can lead to unnecessary struggle, repetition of lessons, and extended waiting. What could have been a short transition becomes a prolonged process. Delay also affects spiritual confidence. Each time you hesitate after hearing God's voice, it becomes easier to ignore it the next time. Sensitivity to God's direction weakens when obedience is inconsistent. Over time, you may begin to question whether God is speaking at all, when the real issue is that his previous instruction was never acted upon. Obedience sharpens spiritual hearing, while delay dulls it. God's purpose is not only about destination, but about timing. Being in the right place at the wrong time can be just as damaging as being in the wrong place entirely. When God says move, he is aware of what is unfolding behind the scenes. He knows what must happen now and what will not work later. Immediate obedience places you in sync with his divine rhythm, where grace flows more freely and resistance is reduced. Quick obedience also demonstrates trust. It declares that God's wisdom is greater than personal reasoning. It shows surrender, not recklessness. God honors those who respond without delay because their action reflects confidence in his leadership. Even if the step feels small, obedience sets greater things in motion. When you move, when God says move, momentum is released. Doors begin to open, clarity increases, and peace follows action. Delay may feel safe, but obedience is where destiny advances. Acting when God speaks keeps you aligned, protected, and positioned for everything he has already prepared.